In our main segment here on Mastering Dungeons this week, we are going to continue our look at the Daggerheart game. Uh, Last time we talked about running sessions, so this time we're going to talk about planning a campaign. But first, if you've been listening to our review of various games, including this one, you've probably heard us both heap praise upon games as well as level criticism against it. So much of what we are discussing here and with other games is more about the challenge of designing and running games than it is the particular game we're looking at. We are using these games as a springboard for further conversation. Keep that in mind as you listen to this. We are not trying to punch down on any game. We are not trying to punch up, for that matter. What we're doing is we're shadowboxing, right? We're sparring with the inherent contradictions of what a game can be, what it does, what it takes to make a game and teach a game, what it means to chase perfection and always come up short. So we are trying to find strength as well as the weaknesses of these games and the words that are used to explain to how to run them. We are looking through the lens of our experience for bad advice in the game that sounds good, or for places where the game could be even better than the rules are allowing.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep all of that in mind as we continue to discuss this game and any other games and products that we review.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that like if we hated something, we wouldn't even be talking about it,
Yes.
right? Like if something is so bad that we're gonna pan it, we're gonna not cover it because it's not worth your time or ours. We can always find things like this that have great aspects and aspects that could be better. Things we learn from, things we think someone could have learned from us, if we dare say it that way, or from the others who educated us
Mhm.
more truthfully, right? If it's terrible, we wouldn't be talking about it. We do actually like Shadow Dark. I know this still came up in our comments last week. We do, really.
Yes, we like it. We think it is very worthwhile to continue to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we will continue to do that right now with the section from the rules, playtest rules, about running a campaign. This chapter has a very clear perspective, and it's don't prescribe the adventure or campaign beforehand. Don't limit what your campaign could be.
Yeah.
Instead, build it around the player characters and plan each session after the next uh, based on what they have already done or who their characters are in the case of session zero.
And I already have opinions, Shawn.
You do. Tell me
I
those
do.
opinions, Teos.
Well, because I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, because I don't know that anything previously, and I don't even know where are we in page count? We're like at page, uh,
220-ish.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
page 198 right now at the
Okay.
start of this section.
Yeah.
We're 200 pages in, and now you're telling me that when I create a series of adventures, I'm not planning more than one session at a time because I'm improvising so heavily. And it's like, wow, I think that could have come up earlier, maybe. Like, it wasn't a thing I was aware of, and that you have this kind of very strong opinion. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. For the playtest, you gave me these prescribed preset adventures that I played out, you know, as they were. And these adventures are not asking me for my background or my backstory or anything like that. And I can understand it if that's just because we're playtesting. But nothing had indicated this to me until I read this. And so I was like, wow, well, maybe shouldn't be as big a surprise as it is.
Mhm. Yeah, this is a huge topic in role-playing game spheres, and it can be difficult or even unfair to GMs to give sort of advice like this, especially new GMs, unless there is going to be very clear, practical, step-by-step advice on how to do the things it's telling the game master to do. Right?
Mhm.
Here's a quote. Nothing should be planned until after character creation is complete, and the details that players provide about these characters will be the primary scaffolding upon which you plan the rest of the campaign.
Hmm.
That's it's great to say this is how it should be because you can have completely excellent campaigns if you are able to pull this off. The question is, how do you pull this off?
Right.
Not only given the rules and everything else we've been talking about, but given who you are and who your players are. Because I can tell you right now, there will be players out there for whom this advice is the worst advice you can give.
Well, and GMs too, right? Like, I mean, I
And
may
and
be
GMs,
thinking to
yes.
myself, I want to tell a tale of uh, exploration across a map where I'm going to unite disparate kingdoms together by visiting each of them and blah 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 blah. And you know, at the end there'll be treachery involving this, that, and the other. And then I hit this and I go, oh wait, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Right. And so what follows now had better be some really solid advice on how to do this and when not to do this,
Hmm.
or when this will need some adjustment based on a variety of factors. So let's see how they do. I will say this. I worked with Encoded Designs, and we made a game, a Fate game called Part-Time Gods of Fate that was built up on a different system, and we converted to a Fate system. It used a very, very, very similar system to what is being described later, what we were about to talk about, because we borrowed from other games. We transformed and added systems that we'd seen in other games. And what is suggested here does the exact same thing, right? It uses tried and true systems for building a campaign to run a game in.
Hmm.
So it's built upon a very solid foundation that has worked for other games. Will it work for this game is something that we have yet to see. So the advice they give here, I think, is very solid. Uh, there are some steps in the process I think are really good. Um, but let's go through them just to discuss them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Part one, building a map. Teos, take us through this.
Yeah, and it's a kind of neat idea because that's the first thing as I started saying all these words, I was like, well, okay, where are we going to go? And so the idea is you're going to take a map, and they say, kind of cool, examples will be available. They're not yet available for the playtest, but there will be example maps. You take this map and you show it to your players at a sort of session zero, maybe session 0.5, because they have characters. And the players are going to look at this map and decide the names of the places on the map. And they can add locations they've invented for their backstory. So you might say, well, the name of this is the kingdom of, uh, Benevolandia, and that's actually where I grew up. And there's a capital city, which is where I came from, and this is what it is, and so on. And you're going to go around all the players doing this. And once there are enough exciting locations and plot hooks, and then I'm like, wait a minute, wait. So there are also plot hooks.
Mhm.
And I guess what they mean is sort of like character driven things. Like if I came from this city in Benevolandia and I have these hooks around my backstory, assuming I did that well, which is some players will be hard to get that out of them, then I do actually have hooks there, right? If you take their examples that we discussed last time, right? I'm a druid, but I'm hunted by elemental powers for these various reasons. Then those could sort of be the plot hooks for that nation. If you think of Critical Role, then some of these examples come to the fore as well. If you know either their games or the cartoon. So now that we're done with this, we take the map back and we decide where the characters will begin to play. So, okay, I've got all these places, they've been named, I've got these plot hooks. I'm going to decide as GM, we start in this particular country, map area, whatever. And now we will begin the game. What do you think?
I think this is a solid process for a foundation for your game. It does give the players a lot of agency to bring stuff that they want for their character's story, their character's background, their character's goals into the game. As long as your character players buy into this process, it can add a great deal of personal investment into a campaign. And that's what you want. You want your players invested. And if giving them that agency to help create the world and brings them some investment, awesome. Uh, what comes to mind right away
Hmm.
is when we consume media that we love, storytelling media, books, novels, comic books, video games, et cetera. What goes into creating that XY axis I had talked about? What comes to play with that YX axis really being strong is repetition and iteration.
Mm.
So you build something and then you say, wait, let me go back and look at the characters. Oh, this character has this. Let me change what I did, either in the character or in the world, to make that stronger. Oh, wait, I was going to have a theme of royalty, but it doesn't work out. I need to change that theme to democracy. All right,
Mm.
now I'm going to go back and look at the characters again. And there's several iterations that take place to make it picture perfect. What this doesn't do is allow for that. So if you create the characters and they have these backgrounds that we've already discussed, and then you look at the map and your character's all about mountains, but the map has no mountains, then you need to go back and make some changes. Or
Yeah.
if the mountains are nowhere near the desert where the background was supposed, right? There needs to be that sort of process, and I'm not seeing it quite. It should be spelled out quickly. Uh, Now, the next step is filling space and leaving blanks, which can help. So, for the first session of play, you take the map, you add some details, but you want to make sure you leave blanks to fill in later. And this can be one step in that iterative process of, oh, wait, my background says X. So as we play, let's say that this X is over here where there's this blank spot on the map. So we can fill that in. It's very important that you do that because you don't want to constrict, um, you don't want to imprison characters with details. You want to inspire them with
Right.
details, and you need to leave some blank spaces for that.
And the blank spaces give you room for surprises and later ideas so that you're not too boxed in and so that the players don't know everything, right? If the players have essentially read the entire campaign guide, then it just becomes it's hard to then please the players because now your ideas have to be like 20 times better than theirs, right? If we're all working
Yep.
from the exact same page. The more that there are some hidden aspects that you know will come out later, then that's great, right? The players know as to take the description of what was in the previous chapter. There was a character that I think they're a bard, they're a member of the nobility, and they had to leave, and they were about to get married. When you don't know exactly why you were thrown out of the kingdom, those blanks give you much more power to tell the story, and you don't have to have the answer immediately. You can think through it and see how play develops, and then go there.
Yep.
To give a more applied example, a recent example, when I was running the second Blade Runner adventure, there was a player who said, I don't know if my character is a replicant or human. And they said, I think my character is, and there's an option where the DM knows and the player doesn't know, but they didn't quite that. They said, I think my character thinks she is uh, a human, but has various, or thinks she is a replicant, but maybe has human-like aspects. And so then that helped me tie that into the adventure better, so that I could play off of it more and
Mhm.
give them some surprises. Which, if anybody has read that adventure, you probably know the very important role I gave them within that story. There's a role that really this worked perfectly for, and then I could play off of that and have
Right.
some surprises, even if they'd sort of said, "But I think I know what I am." Then that could
Yeah.
play out, but still have surprises to it.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are games out there that do this, but I can't think of any right now, which is don't fill in the character sheet completely. right?
Mm,
Maybe if you get
yeah.
two experiences, just fill one experience in at character creation, fill the second one in at some point along the way
Well,
where
Shawn,
it's
honestly,
better.
if this was our review show of what did I think about Daggerheart, this would have been one of the main things I would have said, which is I cannot believe that Daggerheart is creating characters that are as busy as fourth edition, fifth edition, 2024 appears it will be, any of these, where there's just so much to the character when it's supposed to be a narrative game. And I get why the game has all these toothy bits, and I think they can actually be quite fun. But if you could lessen those,
Mhm.
fewer things like experiences, fewer, and then bring them in through story means, I think actually it would be a lot stronger experience and hit their goals a little better. So I
Yeah,
absolutely resonate with what you're saying.
yeah. So let's get into the character backstory. So the advice next is to incorporate character backstories, make notes on major backstory points, and then ask follow-up questions. We get pretty detailed examples of this party of characters, who they are, and how we can tie their backstory together. The advice is look for conflicts that can join two characters together. So if one is dealing with this rival who is constantly thwarting them, and another person was banned from their land, maybe it's that character intersection, that NPC that caused all of this havoc.
Mhm.
And I think this is great advice. You can create some amazing campaigns if you use this method with a couple of caveats. This campaign type is great for certain types of players. Again, I have heard tell of people who have played games that do this. Fate is a great example, where they
Mhm.
sit down and they make their characters and they make a map and they make their backstories. They bring it all together, and that ends up being the highlight of the campaign for them. Nothing that happens afterward in actual gameplay lives up to that creativity that they were able to bring to the game to start. It's like we've created this wonderful world, and the playing out of it, just that
Yeah.
y-axis just never takes off. It's always just flat along the x-axis. And so
It's like
keep
it's
that in
like the
mind.
TV show you watch where you see season one, or season one, or even the first few shows, and you're like, oh wow, there's so much that could happen.
Mhm.
But boy, playing that out, you've set yourself up so high that the
Mhm.
aspirations and expectations are just so high.
Mhm.
Fulfilling those can be a challenge, right?
Yeah. And sometimes those conflicts that you set up, and this goes back to the TV show thing, those conflicts that you set up, they are hard to maintain for a long period of time.
Hmm.
So this great NPC, terrible NPC who we're all connected through, we meet them at the end of the fourth session and we kill them.
Hmm.
And then what?
Right.
But if we don't meet them by the end of the fourth session, it loses steam. It
Yeah.
loses that sort of thing. And this is where a game master who is a good storyteller, who, well, let me even say a great storyteller, can make ways to bring that NPC in without a full revelation, without a
Hmm.
full resolution to that conflict. They can make intermittent conflicts that serve as a proxy for the main. But even then, it's hard to maintain for too
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. And when I write adventures, sometimes I've written adventures for organized play where I think to myself, this is a little bit hard to run. I'm
Mhm.
asking a lot of the GM. Some GMs are going to have a terrible experience with this. And I'm okay because it's one adventure out of many you will run. So
Mhm.
some percentage of people running this will struggle with it because it's not just a simple adventure. It's complicated and there's a lot going on. But some folks will say, this was the best thing ever. Have a new approach now in my toolkit. I have a new way I want to approach adventures, and that's great. And that's how I feel. The reason I do that is because I have had that happen to me, and I love it when something just blows my mind. So sometimes I
Mhm.
try to create that knowing I will fail. But that's an adventure. This is a
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And so that's the danger is you're creating a system that some GMs will just go, all of this scares me. I'm now
Mhm.
paralyzed. How would I ever run this? Or some players will go like, yeah, I can see three people at this table are super excited about that. I just want to, chuck spells at stuff. But now I got to tell you like who my uncle is or something, and maybe it matters. Like it's literally going to matter more to you than to me, fellow players, because I really just want to kill stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's very true. So that's the player type aspect that
Hmm.
needs to be addressed with any sort of advice that you give about
Yeah.
entertaining a table, yourself and the players, or facilitating the entertainment of everyone.
Yeah. And a lot, is hinging. It's explained as if, oh, this is simple, but that idea, like they describe this, rival treasure hunter and the kingdom. You're just hoping that sort of works, right? Like, oh, this is a way I can join these two together. But it might not really work. And now this is like a major plot point that you're going to have to try to get rid of quickly and try to find a substitute that'll work. That's its own set of work on top of what you've got to do each session to have like an interesting dungeon or environment and monsters and all these things. You're trying to now also like kind of actively screenplay, right? Screenwrite and it's yes, DMs are sort of kind of always doing that, but you have a lot of extra load. And I think that, has this helped me with that load? It's given me some pointers, but I don't know how much it's helped me with the load. Like the load is still there. And while I can see a little bit of guidance, like this example of how you tied two together, I think this could scare a lot of GMs. And
Yeah,
it's not an option because it's one thing when you're reading like, hey, for D&D, you could do this, right?
yeah.
Like you could say, run Rime of the Frost Maiden, but you make up the 10 towns.
Mhm.
And if you want to do that, you can, but you can also just use the 10 towns. It's up to you, right?
Right.
Um, this is saying to you the game is always make those things up. And that's a lot of load. It's assuming people always want to take on.
The next section is called planning a story arc. And what you just said, and looking ahead to that, we said, I think it was maybe after we stopped recording last week, we thought, this advice is very much a screenwriting
Hmm.
sort of advice. The games that we play are either direct descendants of or sort of formed from the role-playing games of the past, which were spawned by novels and short fiction, Lord of the
Hmm.
Rings, the Conans, the John Carter of Mars, the Vance books,
Yeah.
this sort of novel fantasy, sword and sorcery fiction that has a different pace, that has different
Hmm.
stakes, that has a different expectation than watching a visual media like a TV show or a major motion picture. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering if, and this is something I haven't answered myself, I'm constantly thinking about it though, is when trying to base games or adventures on that media, as opposed to a longer form fictional media, how does it translate? Goes into what goes into it from the game master point of view? What goes into it from the player point of view? What goes into it from the rules point of view? And so I see uh, the tension between don't prescribe the adventures ahead of time, right? Don't form the adventures before you know the characters. And I see prescribe the adventures ahead of time based on the character's backstory. That's basically what we were told, right? We were told, don't prescribe the adventures. Okay, now go ahead and start prescribing the adventures because you know their backstories and you have a little bit of their input. So, what's the difference between those? What's the difference between running a fully written adventure that provides for multiple character backstories and an adventure that you wait to hear the backstories to write? So, you used Rime of the Frostmaiden, right? What's the
Hmm.
difference between taking Rime of the Frostmaiden, a fully prescribed adventure, and saying, all right, this is how I'm going to link backstories in? and I'm just going to use the adventure as
Hmm.
written with whatever tweaks I need to make.
Yeah,
Versus I'm going to now write Rhyme of the Frost Maiden because I know the
right.
character's backstories.
Well, and in theory, what it would mean is if we take like the 10 towns, for example, right? Because the characters would say what those towns are,
Mhm.
they would remember them, right? This is one of the
Mhm.
things that works really well with like the Dresden Files collaborative system of
Right.
world building, and why I've written a supplement based off of that is because when you get players to sort of add details, boy, they remember that. If I just tell you the 10 towns, all player eyes glaze over. They maybe remember one thing that's interesting, but there's very little, nothing feels tangible, and it takes many sessions for it to all really settle in. But if you told me that, one of them is where they brew all the beer, and one of them has the, nefarious Zentarum have plans in play, and one of them, and so on, now you guys, the players, have this kind of meaty thing, and everything I'm creating plays off of that. So it's going to be a lot more relevant and impactful for sure. But
Mhm.
it's also a fair amount of work. And some of it may not get used much, right? We may not visit all 10, but you help me detail 10. I picked the most interesting ones, hopefully. But maybe there's some extra work there.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, based on player types, you do this and you have one or two players who are super into it, and they're the ones that do most of the work creating the towns. So you still have
That's a
the
danger.
three other players who didn't really invest in that, still
Right.
not sure what the town is.
Well, and also, if two of them couldn't make this session, or one of them couldn't make this session,
Yeah.
or one of them leaves the campaign and a new player comes in, boy, that's obviously one can handle that, but it does give you you take a hit. I mean, Mike Shea was talking about when he ran Shadow Dark, how it's really tough when they all come up with these ideas, and those are the goals that the campaign is now revolving around, and then their characters all die,
Mhm.
and it's like, wait, are we still doing these things?
Mhm.
Because we the players know these goals, but boy, most pretty much everybody's dead. Whoever came up with these goals, maybe we should change our goals, right?
Right.
That is and it is a problem here in this game. I mean, so far, we had I've played two games, and in one of them we had a character die. So this is again one of
Mhm.
these cases like we talked about with Blade Runner, very character arc heavy,
Mhm.
but you are supposed to have the ability to die out in a blaze of glory and all that. So now we got a new, yeah,
Right.
it's interesting. Hmm.
And what it comes down to is cool encounters are cool encounters, regardless of why you're doing them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, you need to break into the prison. It could just as much be you're breaking in because there's treasure in there that you need, or your mentor is in there, or the person you need to kill is in there because they wronged you in the past, or
Right.
or 27 other reasons.
Hmm.
Whereas I want that encounter to be fun for whoever plays it, regardless of their motivation to get
Right.
in there. And so that's the difference between a top down and a bottom up, or the inside out,
Yeah.
outside in
Yeah.
world building, where
Right.
I'd rather have the encounter created. We'll come up with reasons to go there and the details that it transfers to
Yeah.
the players.
Yeah. And I would say if we look at 13th Age, right? 13th Age has the icons that allow you a system, once you become comfortable with it, the icons, which are these iconic elements of society, the dragon, the gold dragon, the good dragon force, magical force in the world, the emperor, these different icons, the diabolist, right? The dark Hades underworld type area. When you have these things interconnecting, you can play off of them because you understand them very iconically, and you know the characters have relationships to them. One is opposed to this, and one is aligned with this, and one has a mysterious, enigmatic relationship with this other one. So you can easily riff off of that as you are creating. You can also do things like roll to see what is in play in this particular session, right? That's an option that's in the book, and I'm sure there are new ones in the second edition that I haven't seen yet. So that gives you the ability to shake things up and keep things very relevant, And you have things like the backstory and so on that change the world as both its character creation as they play so that it feels like you have a stake in the game. But you can still have an adventure you've set up ahead of time
Mhm.
and everything works off of that. Here, they're really, I mean, they're kind of putting all their eggs in one basket of this is the expectation for how you should run it. And they're not saying, or just, take an old D&D adventure off the shelf and do the following things. Like that's not on the table here. Obviously,
Mhm.
you could do that, but it
Right.
is not at all intended. And so they really are focusing very specifically on a particular way to play. Although again, their playtest adventures don't indicate, don't jive with this.
And the final section of this advice is called planning a story arc. And it takes us through what a story arc is, how to divide that arc into a three-act structure with an intro, the trials and tribulations, and then a finale. And they suggest that if it's 4 sessions of play, we'll have one session being the intro, 2 sessions covering the trials and tribulations, and then one section being the finale.
Hmm.
And it's all fine. It's all completely usable information. It's just a different way to look at it using this sort of screenwriting uh,
Yeah.
format.
Well, and also that, I mean, I think I generally think about this as well when I'm writing an adventure or running campaigns. I tend to think in arcs, but I also think about things like overlapping arcs. Like there's the arc of this particular part of the story, but I'm also starting up the next one and warming it up. And there's none of that kind of advice here. And also specific to this game system, okay, I'm running arcs, but what does that mean given that I'm only planning right before I do a session? So it's kind of, like there's no scaffolding here to help me other than we'll do that. It's like, okay, I'm starting off the story. That's pretty clear. But now I got to have like 3 sessions from now, a finality that I cook up using this. And I think, some GMs will have a little tough time with that, figuring how to
Yeah.
do that when I'm also riffing off of things. But it is important, and they don't kind of talk about this, but you did earlier. When you're playing off of the characters, you don't want it to all just feel like it's endless monotone, right? It's just this X axis. You have to kind of go up and down and vary that up, which their discussion of beats didn't talk about, right? Those are just kind of plot points. And
Right.
that is an important thing to say, that like with your characters, you want that arc to go up and down a bit and conclude, but leave some questions that lead to the next arc and so on. And we don't quite get that here, which I would have liked a lot more support, whether you're playing it, Hollywood style arcs or not. We do get an example, but and there are some beats to it, but I would like more support here on how to do that.
Yeah. This is where the definition of a word can be confusing. And again, I talked about beats last time, so I'm not going to say beats. I'm going to say plot points. So they say, in Act One, we're going to think about how to make this adventure, this part of the adventure work. And so they have plot point one, the characters see evidence of something that is in one of the characters' backstories.
Mm-hmm.
Plot point two, they arrive in a new city and they see everything is overgrown because there's a plant villain that's part of this. So you're going to see everything overgrown. They're going to meet townsfolk who tell them about the situation, and it's one of many fine ways that you can create
Mm-hmm.
your content. Um, I prefer to think of it in terms of encounters
Mm-hmm.
rather than plot points that may be an encounter, but maybe several encounters.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, another name is scene, right? It's a scene
right.
as it would be in a TV show or in a novel. Like you're gonna have that scene play out,
Mhm.
which I think is better than a plot point because it's helps you think about what that will come off, how you will describe it, what the players will interact with. You're visualizing it, right?
Yeah. And that's where the characters will actually interact with the game and your story by
Mm-hmm.
rolling dice or making decisions, as opposed to just sitting back and being hit with information. And that's where using a screenwriting thing or a fiction thing or any other template sort of is a risk,
Yeah.
because in those media you are sitting back and you're getting hit with images. A game is interactive. A game is something where you need to not only decide how the characters are going to interact, but what's at stake and what are the consequences of those things. What's the consequence of a failed roll? What's the consequence of losing a fight with one of these creatures? And so at some point, you need to, as the game master, step outside of that role of story director and step into the role of game designer and figure out where that interaction is going to be the most dramatic, the most impactful, the most memorable.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this paragraph on a living world, which I thought was interesting. It says, one of the most exciting aspects of gameplay is having the world change as the PCs move through it. After you finish each session, think about how the world at large has been affected by the events that unfolded, and what story beats in the future might reflect those changes. What NPCs have been the most impacted? What adversaries or allies might come into the story because of what happened? Letting the story unfold naturally based on what the PCs have done, and showcasing how the world has changed because their actions, both good and bad, can remind your players what they do in the game truly matters. And I get it. It's a good vision. I think it's also going to scare away a lot of folks, right? Even looking at the example that they give here of the couple of arcs in the campaign, they give you these, 3 acts that would happen in a story about this artifact and digging into some of the backstories of the example characters. I think that a lot of GMs may read this. I mean, maybe listeners can tell us whether they agree or not, but read this and go like, ooh, I don't know that I can do it this well. Can I run this game?
Yeah.
Whereas I think that if you look at a
yeah.
typical game that says, hey, we decide to put down a goblin cave and there's a, captured person in the back and supplies, as we have in the intro D&D adventure, folks can go, oh yeah, I could do that. Right? That makes sense. And if you were given additionally an example of like, and hey, have something from someone's backstory be amongst the items you recover. Oh yeah, I can do that. That seems like it's pretty easy. I wonder whether this is intimidating, whether it feels like a little too much for a lot of players, and both GMs and players, to get to this level of what's being asked here.
Yeah, because not only do you have to take the story that's unfolding and then answer all of those questions, then you have to say, okay, well, which enemies do I bring in to the next battle to show this?
Yeah.
All of the rules stuff needs to be managed as well as the story stuff. And I've run campaigns like this. I've run campaigns like this that I think have gone pretty well, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting to create at that pace, even if it's once every 2 weeks. There's a lot that goes into that. And yeah, it's an interesting thought that I, like you, want to hear from listeners about their experiences both playing in games like this, running games like this, and what it took to make it a success.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the way I look at it is, this is perfectly great, but if you're trying to make the game work for a lot of different people, what is the better way to do that? Because artistically speaking, right? I love this. Like, this is really neat artistically, just as there are a number of indie style games that have some really neat art to how the game works. And I love that. But I may not run those all the time, right? Even Fiasco. Like, I think Fiasco is super cool. I'm not going to run it all the time. I will run it sometimes, and it'll be a great experience when I run it every now and then, every few years. Because not all of my players want to have that kind of experience too, right? And so we'll do that every now and then. This is kind of digging into it, and I go, well, wow, is this going to limit the audience for the game? And Critical Role probably needs to ask that question. If they care not just about the art of it, but the money of it. Is this making it sort of a little less, accessible, the reach of it? When they could take other alternatives, right, of saying more like more what a lot of other games do, where they say you have your framework that the DM is coming up with. Here's how you then are constantly adding in what the character's side of it. Yeah. You're working off of that framework, and you don't have to plan everything sort of every session brand new. You can have thought through that arc ahead of time, and then you're adding things based on what the players have accomplished and their backstories and so on. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a good question.
So thank you, Teos, for sharing your thoughts and expertise. Thank you to all our listeners out there. And thank you to our Patreon supporters. Whether you're a Master of Dungeon supporter, a Master of the Realm supporter who gets special shout outs in our show notes, or Masters of the Multiverse who get named on the air. Chris Webster, Javier Waziak, Graham Ward, James Walton, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Trace, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Krishna Simonse, Andy Shockney, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post-Fiction RPG Audio, Mighty Zeus, Mike Olson, Tom Nelson, creator of the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, John Mickey, Trey McLemore, Eric Mengi, The Mathematician, Paul Mata, Chad Lynch, Jim Klingler, a.k.a. DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler, and Paige Lightman, The Mighty Jerd, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, Will Doyle, Evil John, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, David Bastianson, Frank Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you for your support. You can also become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. We very much appreciate any support that you can throw our way. You can also help us out by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this podcast. And you can also subscribe via YouTube, like, subscribe, and all those things on YouTube. Teos, what have you been up to?
Today I released the last of my series looking at the Neverwinter MMOs, Neverdeath Graveyard. So if you want like a really cool tomb, there is a water clock guild in Neverwinter that uses complex clock gear work, magically empowered, elementally empowered. It shows up in the Vecna Eve of Ruin adventure, so you can use this as ideas to expand, or just a really cool concept for a tomb. That is on my YouTube channel. You can get to all of it through alphastream.org. What have you been up to, Shawn?
I have been up to very little that I can talk about publicly, but you can always talk to me on all the socials at Shawn Merwin. You can follow the podcast on their socials at Mastering D&D. And, of course, you've got the YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/@masteringdungeons. Now we know everything there is to know about planning and running a campaign in Daggerheart. So what are we going to do now?
Well, let's see. I guess I need to know your backstory in order to answer that question.
And my backstory is a secret, and I'm not going to reveal it until I'm at least 4th level.